All right, welcome to Design Your Blended Course. I am Melissa, an e-learning author and part of the design and development team with LSU Online and Continuing Education. And I will be presenting with Karina, who's also an e-learning author. Karina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you, Melissa. As Melissa just said, we work together here with LSU Online in the design and development team. And I, like Melissa, am an e-learning author, and I look forward to helping you guys out today. So any questions, any point in time, just put it in the chat and we'll be glad to help you out.
All right, and if you're not familiar with LSU Online's design and development or our D&D team, we are a service and support division, so we partner closely with faculty to create high-quality learning experiences, incorporating instructional design, user experience, and other design principles. We also facilitate faculty professional development offerings, such as this workshop, to provide support and guidance to faculty who are designing, redesigning, and teaching courses for blended or online delivery. Just a reminder, please mute your mics just to cut down on background disruptions. All right, so the purpose of the workshop today is to guide you in developing a blended course that combines the best of face-to-face learning with the best of online learning. Our objectives focus on applying characteristics of blended learning, selecting appropriate assessments, learning objectives, and instructional strategies, and facilitating student engagement. I want to note that this is a hands-on discussion-based workshop. So we're going to work through different scenarios and question prompts. So with our group being as small as it is right now, feel free to unmute your mic to answer questions, or if you feel more comfortable, you can type in the chat pod so that we can have a good discussion. We do have a couple of team members monitoring the chat. So again, like Karina said, if you have any questions, please put them there. And if possible, we'll address them at the end of the session. But if we run out of time, we will compile all the questions and make sure we follow up with you. All right, so let's start this workshop by reviewing the three main course modalities or formats. So we have the traditional face-to-face format, probably what you're most familiar with. These activities occur in person in a brick and mortar classroom. All instructor, student, and student-to-student contact typically occur face-to-face in this format. On the other end, we have an online format where all the primary content, activities, instructions, and interactions occur online, typically in an asynchronous fashion. And then in between there, we have a blended course, which is going to be our focus today, where a portion of the traditional face-to-face instruction is replaced by online learning, often alternating between online and face-to-face activities and instructions integrated into the course. The learning occurs partially face-to-face and partially online. Depending on your specific course and course sizes, you probably have a good idea of what modality will be best for the fall. You probably already have that in mind. So let's go ahead and start the discussion about our experiences teaching in these different modalities. So let me launch a poll. All right, so you should see a poll coming up asking you to select all of the ways you've taught. So if you've got experience teaching only in the classroom, or if you've taught a fully developed online course before, if you've developed a planned out blended course. Because of recent events with the spring, many of you may have been thrown into the fire and have taught blended because of spring. And perhaps we have somebody who's never taught before, so I wanted to throw that in there as well. So take a few minutes and go ahead and select the option that best fits you, or the options. You can choose more than one. looks like we're waiting on maybe one other person. If you haven't voted yet, look for that poll and make your selection, and we'll publish those results once we get that. All right. Thank you all for participating. All right. You should all get to see what I'm seeing. So we have everyone in attendance today has taught face-to-face, so we can definitely draw on that commonality. A few of you have taught in that shift to online because of the spring, and a couple of you actually have some experience teaching in a blended format. So I'll love to hear from you when we start brainstorming some ideas. So I'm going to put that away. All right. So let's kind of start this off with a discussion. Thinking about those modalities that you've taught on and taught in, what have been some of the most successful ways that you've engaged your students in those courses? Feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat. Any face-to-face experiences? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, so I like the idea of being able to switch between, say, slides and a document camera and other things, because it makes it feel more real. So that you can, I feel that talks that presentations that are solely based on, say, slides, students start to fall asleep or whatever, right? So if you get to say, oh, let's switch the document camera and I'll actually write something out by hand or whatever.
So mixing up some of that delivery method of the content.
And somehow finding a way to make it more personal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard.
Putting your own personal instructor voice into it and making it not so maybe textbook focused or pre-planned.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I like that. That's a good idea. Anybody else have any ideas or scenarios that they've gone through?
Think about how do you build a community within the classroom? How do you get those students to engage with one another? Does anybody do any like group work or pairing, or maybe you naturally see it occur kind of study groups?
I would like to find a way to enforce students showing their faces and participating. That was difficult when I did the switch because, well, I guess I could show my face here. So that was difficult when I did the switch, because it turns out that students are in their pajamas or whatever, and they don't feel like showing them, or they're walking around the house and things like that. So I don't really know how to solve that problem.
But you feel like that when you get those that do show their face, maybe they're like connecting more.
Oh, so much more, so much better. Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a common question, Stephen, that a lot of people have. Even in the classroom, just trying to get students sometimes to stay awake. It is difficult. Yeah. Suggestions are just trying to make it as entertaining as possible. Something we were talking about in a meeting this morning is to have the instructor have more of their own voice in it. So kind of based on what you're teaching, bring in a lot of scenarios or bring in more of application. It was kind of easy for me. I was a dental hygienist for over 20 years. So when I taught, probably the best experiences that I had with my students was when I would bring stories in of my patients and different scenarios of what I did, and applying it to that material.
Yeah.
That seemed to do the best. Now, I'm not exactly sure what you teach, and if that is a
but I
possibility.
Math, yeah, kind of. But I suppose what you're saying, though, that comment actually applies to any form of teaching, right?
Correct. It could be within any form or any modality, whether it is in person, whether it is online.
And I'm just wondering how to do the tutoring. I've become pretty good at this in the classroom, but I just don't know yet how to. I mean, maybe I just need to be more aggressive and tell people, put your videos on, and I'm going to give you points. Or no, I don't know. I'm not sure what's legal, what's not, and so there are probably lots of fuzzy areas in terms of what we're allowed to require.
Go ahead, Melissa. I'm sorry.
So I think the advantage of going into the fall semester and having some time to think about this, it gives you some time to kind of explore how can we engage with the students, how can we get them to engage with each other and engaging with the content, and be intentional from the very beginning in setting those expectations and that culture within the classroom, where shifting was a different situation and there were, other balls getting juggled. And so that's part of this, is when we're planning our blended courses, is to be intentional and thinking about those ways to engage the students. And like you said, I mean, you can set up certain requirements and, some very small value activities that, are worth maybe part of the grade, that kind of motivates them to get involved in some of these activities that, if they're voluntary, some students may not engage in. So I think this was a good
no, I agree. And just one more thing on that, Melissa, is, as you had mentioned earlier, Stephen, having your participants or your students walking around in their pajamas, or feeding their child while they are participating, that does kind of have some hindrance to it. It is kind of distraction, or it is kind of distractive, sorry. So unfortunately, kind of mandating leave the videos on, as tempting as it is, and offering those extra credit points, you will kind of have to find a happy medium with that. One of the things one of my instructors did, and this was in class, he actually would remember what he wore on a specific day, or he would bring in an item and he would talk about that. And in his test, now I don't know how legit this could be or should be, but it goes to that participation and making sure that people are paying attention. So one of his test questions would be, okay, last week or on this day, what shirt did I have on? Or I brought this item into class, what was it? So little odds and things like that, to make the students begin participating, or at least becoming a little bit more engaged.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on into a little review on kind of what the research says about blended, because I think that's always a good, being an R1 institution, it's great to know what the research has found about blended learning. So I found this great study that looked at kind of the benefits and challenges. So I want to kind of very briefly review them. Students in blended courses were found to have improved learning outcomes compared to their peers in a traditional face-to-face, which my background's in psychology, so this really aligns with some cognitive science findings, that when you space out your learning, you learn it better than when you cram it. I think we all have experienced that. When you've crammed right before an exam, maybe you did okay on that exam, but that long-term retention of that material tends to fade away quicker. With a blended learning course, you're building in activities that are going on, ways to provide instruction outside of the classroom time. Therefore, you're spacing out their learning. Another finding was that redesigning a course into a blended format was also linked with increased course completion rates, improved retention, and better student attitude towards their subject matter, which we certainly want to see. They also found that for faculty, they felt that they had an enhanced student to teacher interaction. So they actually felt like they were able to engage with the students a little bit better than a traditional classroom. They also noticed that students engaged in their learning. They became active learners instead of just passive learners. They became more involved. I did not want to ignore the student challenges. I think they're very important for us to learn from and to be intentional when we're building so that we can try to potentially overcome or avoid them, lessen them if possible. So the students expressed that they found it challenging to set their expectations. They thought it was going to be easier or less time. They struggled with time management, which is not really that surprising. It's kind of a common challenge for many undergraduates. So if you've taught freshmen, you know many of them are trying to gauge that expectation of courses, comparing it to perhaps high school. They're trying to manage their time. Again, it's different than what they're coming from a structured high school. So they're learning and navigating that. But having clear and frequent communication, a well-organized course can help your students avoid some of those challenges. And we're actually going to talk about that in more detail later on. And the faculty also expressed some challenges. They felt a little frustrated about the time it took to redesign their course into a blended course and expressed some needs for professional development support and learning how to use tools. So if you've struggled with any tools in Moodle, that's kind of some of the things they expressed. So we wanted to look at those and address some of these concerns. And hopefully if they resonate with you, hopefully after this workshop, you feel a little bit more empowered to tackle these, not feel so overwhelmed with this, and be able to manage your time as you're building out your course. I will address if you feel like you need more knowledge on Moodle specific tools, since this is not a how-to do Moodle, I would encourage you to reach out to the FTC for those. All right, so if you could either unmute yourself or put in the chat if anybody in here is part of the BC session, so the shorter 7-week session. So this was actually developed way earlier than we were knowing that fall was going to be kind of more blended for all semesters, and it was intended because those BC sessions are getting shortened. But I know it's now going to be beneficial for many people. So it looks like not too many of y'all. All right. So I just want to recap what a blended course is. So that's where we take the traditional face-to-face instruction and provide some of that instruction online. Here at LSU, it needs to be engaging. That instruction that we're providing online, it cannot just be a repository of materials. It can't be just files uploaded. So, so none of y'all are doing the BC sessions, but you probably have an idea of what percentage of your course is going to be offered online. And I would encourage you to keep that in mind as you're building out your course. So later on, Karina is going to show you an alignment map and show you how you can track the time the student's going to be spending on your course so that we can calculate and make sure we're kind of still hitting that bar of hours. So for example, if you know you're going to have 25% of your course delivered online for a typical 3 credit hour course, that's going to be equal to 11.25 hours online engagement. After the workshop in our follow-up email, we will be sending you instructions on how to self-enroll into a faculty resource course. And in this course, you'll be able to find a calculator to estimate time on task, to help you gauge activities that you're not quite sure what the average student would spend, how much time they would spend on that. So you can keep track of that to aim for the 45 hours that would typically be offered in the classroom. So we want to make sure we cover those for sure. All right, so this brings us to our top 5 considerations when designing your blended course. We're going to discuss each of these in detail, but first I want to give you an overview. So we have build the course as an integrated and cohesive learning experience. We want to leverage the best of the face-to-face and online components to optimize delivery of the intended outcomes. We want to engage the learners so they benefit from both delivery modalities. We want to notify the learners of course expectations, protocols, due dates for online and face-to-face activities. And we want to design those activities and assessments with suitable sequencing and transitions between face-to-face and online portions of the course. So let's dive into discussing the first one, building an integrated and cohesive learning experience. So a well-designed blended course should feel it should be integrated between the face-to-face and online component. We don't want it to feel like 2 complementary classes where they have certain expectations online and that's going to cover one part of the class, and certain things on campus and that's a separate thing. We want them to be interwoven, if you will, integrated. So if you can think about your class and think about an example how you might build your course so that your face-to-face and online components are integrated. Anybody want to share any ideas that they're playing with the idea? Any activities you currently do face-to-face and you're wondering how that might bridge online?
Class discussions seem like something that you could very easily bridge over to the online platform.
And they don't have to live on one spot. You can start a discussion in one place and then carry it into the other. It's always great if you've ever had a class discussion and something comes up and you don't know the answer to, and you want to say, okay, well, let's research that and find out more about that. You can segue that to an online discussion where it's a little bit easier to research and provide that extra information. Those are a good example. Any other examples, ideas?
My name is Sarah. I'm a new graduate student here. So anyway, all of my undergrad for the last couple of years was all online because I did distance learning in California. But one of the things that I thought was interesting that we would do, because it was the same type of thing, they had to make it engaging and all of that stuff. But one of the things that we had to do for another project was that we basically got all the instructions and some kind of ideas for things, and then we had to present stuff online, like upload videos or I can't think of the name of the website. You make like this little cartoon presentation thing. I can't remember the name, but they're super cute and they're really fun to do. That might be a good one too.
Yeah.
I'm taking away all my suggestions I was going to say later.
I have an idea of what I'm going. I haven't done this yet, except for the transition last spring. But I was thinking that it seems that the lectures in class, call them lectures, in person, they used to be, you can make them engaging, you can talk to students, you can look at their faces, you can see their responses. That seems to be very difficult to enforce, as I was saying before, right, and virtually. So, and it seems that these lectures become more really like a lecture that's kind of disengaged from the students, and that might be something that's really difficult to overcome in itself. So, and you know how some people have been preparing videos that you can put online, so students can watch those whenever they want to, and perhaps that the actual class period could be used. This is what I'm thinking. Maybe someone has done this. Can give comments. That's I could use the class time in a more productive way by requiring, say, students, groups of students at a time, maybe just 2 or 3 or however big the class is at a time, to come for 20 minutes, actually be there, show their faces, and so I teach math, and actually not just ask me how to do problems, but give me their ideas about what they've thought about this and how they got started, right? So they actually have to do something. You have to come to class and you have to tell me what you thought about. Maybe at least like once a week. Something like that. So I don't know what you think. I've done that, or this is a known thing.
I've not heard that. I have recently heard of for online discussions with math is having like students identified ahead of time working the problem for the upcoming week, and then they're kind of in charge of facilitating a discussion. And so it kind of gets them more involved with thinking through, because it steps up your understanding of something when you're having to help navigate someone else who may be confused on something.
Okay, so that's all right.
And that could be something also done in the classroom where, you kind of identify a couple of students that, here, let's try, you're going to be the one that's going to try to facilitate this discussion. And of course you're there, you're present, you're helping them navigate, because they're not the expert, but you can help if they get a little astray to bring them back where they need to be, and encouraging them with the right kind of discussions. So that's a good idea about how you can. I love how you're thinking about that learner experience. I haven't highlighted that part of this particular point, is thinking about their experience and then thinking about how we can make it cohesive from that face-to-face and online experience.
I also have a little comment that's just maybe a technical one. You know how sometimes it's a little cumbersome to click the mute and unmute button all the time? I don't know if people know that you can just press the space bar and it temporarily unmutes you.
Those are great tips for if you're holding a meeting like this to share up front. Yes, I probably should add that into these workshops.
As soon as when I realized that, life became easier. I'm just pressing my space bar button now I can let go.
Yeah. So one of the examples that I had thought of before this is that if perhaps you taught a lab class, so you need your students there to participate in the lab, instead of just giving them assigned readings to read through, you can present the week's lab and have them post in the discussion board their hypothesis and ask them to use appropriate supporting terminologies. And that gives them purpose in their reading, so that they're not just reading because they were assigned so many pages. It's giving them some kind of motivation, a problem to solve. So they have something that they're looking for as they're reading through the textbook. So this was great. Let's move on to the next one, which I think we've kind of touched on a little bit. But this is about leveraging what is best in face-to-face and what is best online. What are some good online components, and how to optimize those and deliver them to address your intended outcomes. So I think we kind of have all addressed that teaching face-to-face and online is different. They have unique elements. And there's different ways to use them effectively and engage with people. And what traditionally works in one environment may not transfer one-to-one online, but starting to think about it in a different way often opens more possibilities. So I'm going to ask y'all another question. Consider your course outcomes. So think about what you want your students to be able to do at the end of your course. Can you identify any elements in your course that can take advantage of being online, or what parts of your course would be best conducted face-to-face? Feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself. Sarah, I think you said that you did distance learning. Is that right? Were there any elements that you felt this would be really good for a face-to-face, or, oh, I think this works so good online, I wouldn't even want to put it in face-to-face?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a really long mixture of both. So I feel like, I don't know. I think, I'm trying to think back to some of the like specific projects that we had. Personally, I don't have problems speaking in front of people. So like, usually in undergrad, you at some point generally have students get up there and kind of figure out how to talk to a group of people or work in a group. So I've done both. I did a group project online, and that was terrible. The project turned out fine, but I mean, trying to coordinate schedules for Zoom and all of that, as opposed to if you were in person, having your group mates there with you at that scheduled class time. So you already have a lot of time set aside to meet with your group members. So I think if there's any group work, that kind of thing would be really beneficial face to face. But then there was other projects that we did have where we had to do, upload. One of the projects I could think of is we had to do some research on, trying to remember. It was like urban sociology I was taking, and we had to go to a city outside of where we lived, and we had to, connect those back to a presentation. And the instructor let us do PowerPoint or video or whatever we wanted to do basically. But something like that, I think definitely would be much easier to do online, because the student would be able to take time with their computer and, they could, I guess, work on it in a face-to-face setting if they really were having some issues with the concepts and things that might be helpful for the instructor to be like there and present. But I think online for that type of project would be really simple.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ties back to the last principle that we just covered, the building that integration. So where they're working on it on their own, on their computer, going out in person, but maybe bringing back those questions about concepts into the classroom. I think that's going to build that cohesive course while leveraging the different modalities to set them up in those different formats.
Well, yeah, and everybody too, learns so differently. And I think that's one of the challenges is I've heard a lot of people, I'm 33. So for an undergrad student, I'm older, but as a graduate student, I'm probably about average. But a lot of my friends who are either going back to undergrad or, finishing up at this point with this kind of new stuff that's going on, a lot of them are really stressed out about doing online learning because they maybe don't have the technological skills. So as far as like optimizing delivery, I think it would be beneficial to have different, I sound like, so I'm a GTA too this semester, and I've been thinking about this same thing, depending on my instructors and how much they want me to help with or whatever for their courses. But, thinking of different things to do, like having, I don't know if there's vocabulary words or something, doing something so that kinesthetic learners can have something to do with their hands. It could be something as simple as like possibly a word search or something like that, or a crossword or something, but then other people work better with just that information listed and then they write it down themselves, and,
Yeah.
So I think that's some of the challenge too. Yeah.
Sarah, can I ask you something?
Sure.
So suppose that there were no COVID and you completely had the option of doing the class however you wanted. So it could be completely in person. Would in that situation, would there be any particular reason why you would choose to do partially online?
Well, for me, so I have a family. I have 3 children that are 4.5 and under.
Okay.
A lot of times, yeah, a lot of times for me, it's an issue with scheduling and trying to figure out, is my husband available during these times? Trying to work out a schedule.
Suppose that were not an issue, like maybe for me. Okay. Then would there be any particular reason to do partly online for the purpose of making the class actually better, even if you didn't have to?
Can I think about that for a second and
Of
then
course.
get back to you?
So I actually want to not negate that. So one of the things I didn't actually keep in that research earlier was that both students and instructors appreciated and recognized that as a benefit of a blended course was having some of that flexibility in their time and their schedule, that they could pre-plan something and put it online and then have a little bit of flexibility to deal with, other things in life with their schedule, because that typically meant that they were not face-to-face during that time.
I also didn't want to negate what you said, Sarah, either. But I was wondering about the other aspect.
So I'm going to give another option. So we've talked a lot about that in that traditional engagement part, but part of teaching is also assessments. So one of the ways we can think about leveraging the different modalities is perhaps using technology, using online to offer a formative assessment. So that would be like a generally low stakes, worth very little or no points, maybe a quiz, a matching, true, false, multiple choice, something that can be auto graded. This gives student immediate feedback and help them identify areas that they need to improve on. And it can provide you as the instructor information on where you may need to go back and readdress some concerns. And that way they can actually learn from those assessments before they get to bigger projects, before they get to a midterm or a big presentation. They can actually take that feedback and learn from it and not just file it away and never think of it again. Because obviously we want them to grow and learn as we give, good feedback. If putting in that time to give good feedback, you want them to actually read it and learn from it. So giving them that opportunity is really good. So a formative assessment works really well online. Again, because you can set them up to be auto graded. They get that feedback immediately. You can consider giving summative assessments online. You may be doing that for the fall because of not returning after Thanksgiving break. One thing that you may want to consider when you're thinking about that is consider if you can come up with a way where it's a performance type assessment. So that would be something that they can demonstrate their ability or show that they can do a task, such as submitting a student profile, a presentation, a student generated project. So it's not a traditional test, but something where they're actually demonstrating that they can do what you're wanting them to do in this course. So that moves us to the E. We've talked a lot. I'm very happy with how much we've talked about engagement. And you've kind of noticed we've circled back to 3 different types of engagement throughout this workshop. So we consider that student to content engagement. At the beginning, you shared that you like to switch between PowerPoint and doing the camera and kind of changing up how you're delivering that content to the students. We talked a lot about student to student engagement. So this is really important for the students, especially nowadays, because it helps them remember that they're part of a cohort and they're not learning in a vacuum. They're not all by themselves. So that should always kind of be kept in mind. Is there an appropriate place where you can encourage that? Is there an appropriate group assignment, class discussion, peer review? It can be formal, it can be informal. You can help them set up encourage study groups. And then there's the kind of more traditional student to instructor engagement. So that's kind of what you think about when you walk into a classroom, like how you're going to engage the students, how you're going to look at their facial feedback. So this can be like a more formal lecture kind of presentation, or that informal engagement, the hi, how are you doing type of engagement. So does anybody have any other ideas that maybe we haven't touched on that you want to bring up that can provide this engagement opportunity in their courses? And anybody is welcome to unmute or type in the chat. We'd be glad to read from the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself.
So what I'm thinking is that the world is probably going more towards virtual meetings. Well, it certainly has been. But we'll see how much that sticks, right? And you know, we try to get students to learn also how to communicate what they're learning. And perhaps now that we are doing online stuff, that this will give us an opportunity to help students to learn and to practice doing presentations like the one that you were doing now. There would just be a different form of presentation that students would learn, would help them learn how to communicate.
Yeah, I think prior to this year, thinking about having a student do an online presentation would seem like not applicable to the real world. But we've certainly now adjusted to this, and this is something that it is a skill that many people are having to utilize, being able to present to a camera, which is definitely a different experience than being in a classroom and being able to move, yeah, so that is a great opportunity there.
In fact, you could even record the student's presentation and send it to them so they can watch it. Because it just makes those things so much easier now. Or maybe not easier, but it forces us to have to do them now. Very nice.
It forces us kind of out of our comfort zone a little bit, and I really think that's probably one of the bigger concerns is, oh, now I have to get in front of a camera. I don't want to get in front of the camera, but yeah, trying to push the envelope a little bit, especially with the students who don't like to do this, or even instructors. And you had just mentioned, Stephen, about recording. And that could be something that the students do. Maybe they aren't good live, but if they could record whatever it is that you're, wanting them to do, and then they could submit it that way. And like I said, you could review it and give critiquing and stuff like that. So
well, I was also thinking that they would do a presentation on the spot that they prepared, but nothing.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then we would record it, or I would record it as they do it. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure this is how it went.
Yeah, I actually had a speech teacher who would do that. And this was I'm going to date myself. So this was back in the 80s.
Yeah.
When I was in college, and it was a speech class, and not all the speeches, but probably about 2 or 3, you actually had to go to the recording studio there on campus, and you had to record yourself. And it was very interesting to look at myself later on.
Yeah,
and it was good. And the instructor gave, her critiques and those type of things. So as I was looking through my video, and I would read her notes to make sure that I could find what she was talking about. So
I think that's a good
experience too.
I think that's a good example of leveraging different modalities so that you, because you have that opportunity to record and give that feedback on that recording and review that. Definitely gives you something different there. Some other examples are you can typically share video clips a little bit easier than you would in a classroom when you're limited to your classroom time. A lot of times you're not wanting to spend a lot of time reviewing maybe recordings of research or of this example, but it's easier to provide that online. And a way to motivate students to do some of those activities can be including like just a short follow-up quiz, just so you can assess, like, have they been paying attention to this? Worth, very little points, so that their grade's not getting inflated by just clicking on things. But we've talked a little bit about having some discussions. I feel like it's easier live or in the classroom to have organic discussions. Trying to set up a discussion forum takes a little bit more thought to think about what is an engaging prompt, how can we create some engagement there so that they're not just going to answer a question that's a right or wrong and there's no discussion that comes out of it. But it sounds like everyone in here has taught before, so how discussions tend to play out, what gets students engaged. So pull on that knowledge to build out, if you're building out an online discussion forum. And again, you can, like Sarah kind of brought up earlier, you can segue that into the classroom. So it doesn't have to live in one place. You can say, we're going to start discussing this here, and then bring it into the classroom the next class period. You can include using Zoom breakout rooms. So if you have a big classroom, Zoom has that breakout room feature, so you can break into smaller groups and discuss things, and then come back to the group and have somebody from each group kind of report on what they discussed. Maybe each group has a different scenario or problem. I think you said you taught math, so maybe they're working their problems in smaller groups, and then they report back to the group, what parts that they struggled on or what answers they got. So again, we're thinking about how can we engage the students in a little bit different way than we would traditionally. And moving on to our final letter, not our final letter, but we're moving on to notifying the students. So earlier, Sarah kind of mentioned having students struggling with technology. So where in a traditional classroom, you typically can walk in and your main role is to deliver the content. In delivering or online class, you need to think about, how can I help notify the students of what's coming up, to set those expectations. Remember, that's something students struggled with. Help them manage their time. Again, another thing that they struggled with. How can I help set up the course in a way that they can spend their time on the content and not spend their time trying to learn new technologies or learning how to navigate Moodle or find different assignments. Sharing tips like hitting the space bar to unmute if you're going to be doing Zoom sessions. That can be a helpful thing to share at the beginning of the class. Making sure that they know what resources are available to them with like ITS, so that they know that they have somebody that they can go to for technical issues. So
I'm sorry, Melissa, go ahead.
I was going to say, what ways have you notified your students to help them with their time management? What have you found to be successful? How have you helped them set realistic expectations for your course? Go.
So this is unrelated to your question. I was just gonna comment really quick that and you mentioned learning new technologies, which isn't, I guess, ideal, but if there's a bunch of different apps you can get on the phone. This one that I'm using actually for my son's school is called Remind. You can join a specific class, like other people who aren't in the class can't get in, but it's essentially a texting app for people who are in the class, or you can do it individually. You can upload files and that kind of thing. It's really, really very easy to use. I'm not the most tech savvy person, that kind of stuff, but it's super duper easy to use, and you can keep in contact with your instructor, or the TAs, or other or peers. I just wanted to throw that out there as maybe a good way to notify people on a better basis also, because not everybody checks their email frequently or gets notifications on their phone for it.
Actually,
Yeah,
that's a good point. What's it called? It's called Remind?
Yeah, it's called Remind. Let me see if I can.
Because, yeah, you're totally right. One of my annoyances these days is students don't respond to my emails.
I don't know if you can you
Unless,
guys see this?
we see that you're in two different classes or
Yeah, so one is for the bus and one is for my son's class. And then you can create class. There's my little picture. Okay, then let me see. I
Okay,
wish I had a better camera system.
Will it also act something like just an instant text message system for between
Yeah.
students? Okay, because
Yeah, so this is, look,
okay, yeah.
it looks just like a text messaging screen, and so you can send it immediately, and it doesn't notify you through email or anything. It's just in the app.
So one of the examples I have on here is to, obviously you want to plan your class out, hopefully where there's no changes, but we know that that's not realistic. Identify upfront how you're going to notify the students and be consistent. I would still strongly encourage you to use a LSU tool. If you're going to use Remind in addition to maybe the news and announcement forum in Moodle. That's a great place to post because it automatically sends out a copy into the student's email, and it's listed in Moodle right there in that form, and it won't go away. So if they need to go back a week or something, it's right there. They can find it easily.
What did you call that? The news and announcements?
Yes, I believe every Moodle course now has, I think it's just by default called announcement on the very first module page. But other ways you can think about notifying students is providing examples if you're asking them to submit something. So giving them examples or a grading rubric so they know where they should be spending their time on things. So moving on to our last letter. The D is for designing activities and assessments with a sequencing and transitions that's suitable to ensure that it is integrated. So thinking about how things are going to flow together. So I'm going to skip over this question, but this is thinking about how you're transitioning from activities to assessments from face-to-face to online. It goes hand in hand with that building integration. So we've covered this pretty thoroughly, but to be kind of respectful of the time, I'm going to kind of move on. Some ideas, an alternative example, I guess. If perhaps you taught a research design course, you could have the students find an article that interests them and share the article online with a short summary, and then have the students vote on which one sounds the most interesting, and then take that one or two articles in the classroom and discuss it in more detail, going through the different parts of an article. That way, it's not just individually, or they feel like they've done this work and no one's ever looked at it, but they know what to expect when they're sharing that. And that's going from that online discussion, searching, using the database tools, to the next activity of understanding the parts of a research paper. So are there any questions before we get into how to kind of organize and plan out this? All right, I don't think I see any. All right, Karina.
Okay, it's my turn. All right, so one strategy that we use to organize all of these components for a course is called an alignment and integration map. It has columns, for you to enter your course outcomes, the different type of activities, instructional materials. And remember that these course outcomes are what the student is to be expected to be able to do at the end of the course. So these outcomes are going to frame the assessments, the course materials that you're going to use, and any activities that you will spend time developing. So each component should be aligned to the course outcomes. If you're familiar with an alignment map, you may notice that the last column on this is a little unique. The integration of the in-class and online component section is where you're going to consider the order in which the students are going to engage with each component. Now you can use this document as a worksheet, as you're planning or reconfiguring out your course. You don't have to submit it to anybody, so it's not homework. This is just a resource that we have created so that you can organize your material. So next we're going to take a look at an alignment map for a course, for a sociology course here. And as you see, we've now put in some of this information. So the topic for the module is going to be the social structure, interaction, and I can't even read, sorry, deviance. Gosh, I'm so sorry. We have 2 course outcomes that we're going to be going over. And in the first column, we have some different activities, so like discussion, a quiz, some type of an assignment. And the materials that we're going to use will be lecture and possibly a YouTube video. So in this last column, we've kind of left this incomplete. And the reason is we want to kind of discuss, now that we see what our material is going to be, we've already picked out the activities and assessments. What we would like to do now is have more of kind of a group discussion as to how do you think you should lay this out. So in other words, based on everything that we've talked about so far, what do you think would be a good component to put online, or what is a good component to do in person? And remember, keep in mind our blend that we just talked about. So making sure building, leveraging, engaging, notify, and design. So any suggestions that you guys might have of how we can completely align this map? So like I said, there's everything that you would do in person, but now we need to kind of find out what would be a best way to split this and put some of this online and some in the classroom.
I feel like I'm answering too many questions. I'm sorry. But
No,
I was just, I feel like I have so much recent experience with this. I'm like, I need to share.
No, actually, I think, no, so you are, and you do have a lot of recent experience. And what is good about your experience is from the student's perspective. And yeah. I think sometimes as instructors, we forget that. And it's not intentional or anything. We're just so focused on, okay, I know I have to teach X, Y, and Z. That's what I'm doing. Right. We tend to forget sometimes what our audience is, or who our audience is, and what are some of those better ways to present this material. So please, you ask away, Miss Sarah.
No. I mean, I was just thinking, because I do have that student perspective just because I've done it so much in the last couple of years, but I'm also coming in as an instructional aid, essentially. So I already have been thinking about a lot of this stuff, like in the last couple of weeks. But maybe, I don't know if this is a thing. Maybe you guys can tell me if this is even feasible. But the stuff that is covered online, in my opinion, should be the stuff that is due online, or that the activities or quizzes or whatever correlate with those things. And then the same thing on the other side with the in-class. If you learned it in class, you can be expected to, we're going to do something with it in class. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think as long as you're being clear with the students where things are due and up front, so there's no ambiguity for the students, I don't think that there's a problem if you're starting something in one modality and it's shifting. I think that kind of goes back to that blend, making sure at the very least you want to make sure that it feels like a cohesive course, that it's not completely separate.
And Melissa had brought up some good ideas earlier. I was kind of joking that everybody's taken my suggestions, but you guys kind of did. So believe it or not, you've kind of answered all of these questions already. We've talked about different things. Melissa was talking about doing a lab. Let's say that you're in a lab course, and then you would go online and post that hypothesis in the discussion forum, and then you're continuing on. So you've started the discussion or the lecture in one modality, and now you're blending it into another modality. Another good idea is going back with, sharing a video clip. You can share the clip in class, or the students can watch the video online. And then let's say they watch it online, then in class, you pull out different parts of that video that you felt were important, different things that you want to hit on, and vice versa. You could watch the video, have somewhat of a discussion in class, and then if there was something that maybe the students did not get out of it that you really wanted them to focus on, then that's now part of your discussion forum. So thinking of different ways like that. And then another one, and Melissa did hit on this earlier, is some type of a research assignment. So, posting up some different articles, or having your students search out for different articles based on the topic that they are having to do their research on, and then possibly taking a poll, having the students determine out of these articles that they picked as a group, pick one or two. And then that, that helps narrow down the field a little bit there. So, any other suggestions? Stephen, I actually have one for you with math, and you kind of hit on it just a little bit there. I think math is one of the harder topics to think of. How am I going to do a discussion forum? And you don't necessarily have to in the blended format. However, this kind of goes to what you were saying earlier. A conference that I was just at talked about this. So every week for the discussion forum, the instructors would put up the answers to the math problems, but they wouldn't do it until everybody turned in their homework first. So the student turned in the homework, and then the instructors posted the answers, and they also posted the steps that it took to do the math problems. So the discussion forum was about the student. Did they get the question right? Did they get it wrong? Did they follow those steps? And what did they think about coming up and solving those problems? And the instructors did say at first, the students were like, oh, I don't know about this. But as time progressed, the students really appreciated that. And the discussions did get very lengthy, and other students, interacting with that.
Yeah, and I think it's also a matter of, that's good. Convincing the students that it is the right thing for them. You really should get used to it, and it'll help you in the long run.
Exactly, and that is very true. Like I said, at first, some of them didn't understand why, but then as time progressed, their grades actually did improve. Not just for the discussion topics, but the grades improved for them taking those quizzes and exams and stuff like that, because they were actually having to think about the processes that they were taking in order to solve those problems, and then discussing amongst each other. And that could be something that they could talk about in class as well, because you talked about doing that for about 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, yes, thank you for that.
All right, well, I think these are some really good ideas that we have come up with. So next, let's take a look at some of the suggestions that we came up with. And this is how we have split it up. If you notice here, we still have the module up there. We still have our course outcomes, and we have each one of the columns there, but we have split it up as a face-to-face or online. And this is something that we recommend that you do. Just kind of plan it out a little bit. Have a roadmap as to how things are going to go. And one of the other things that you will see for this sociology course, and we were talking about this briefly earlier, you need to be kind of cognizant of the time that the students are having to put in for each one of these activities. And you'll see that in the parentheses there. We figured in class a 2-hour discussion, or throughout the week, you've talked, at least 2 hours on this. They have some type of an assignment, it's going to take them about an hour. A quiz, we said 10 minutes, because typically that's the time frame, especially like Sarah was mentioning, if you're going to want to do those type of things online. Keep that in mind as well. For this course, one of the things that we decided to do is there is a group project. And this also kind of goes back to what Sarah was saying earlier. The students are going to work on the material both in class and they're going to work on the material online. We have broken the project down into weekly assignments, and the students will review the material in the class, and they'll also be responsible for a weekly Zoom meeting. So reviewing the material in the class, that gives the students an opportunity to talk about what they're doing, and also too, how's that project coming along, any roadblocks that they might be coming up with. And it's that opportunity for you as the instructor to give some of that feedback to them, and also to the peer review from their students, and just talking about some different ideas, and it might trigger some things like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Looking into different things as that. Any questions on this?
I'm gonna pop in right.
Pop right
So I think a comment was mentioned earlier about how we can take this opportunity to help students learn how to communicate in this modality. That's a skill that they may need to know in the future. Definitely working in groups, not necessarily always meeting it face to face, is another important skill. Especially if you've ever collaborated with maybe another author on a research project that's not in the area, you've had to negotiate schedules and how to run a productive meeting. And so if you have group work, I would encourage you to kind of build in some support systems to build those skills on how to hold a good group meeting, perhaps providing them agendas or helping them identify a note taker or a person leading the meeting, so that they're not stumbling with those skills on how to run an effective group. Again, they can focus on tackling the actual project, the content of the course, and they're building those skills as well.
Yeah, and I guess also too, Melissa, thank you for bringing that up. I know we had talked about that amongst ourselves when we were talking about this course here, is for part of the assignment, they could actually have to turn in the notes from their group meeting, so that you do know that they are actually trying to do something versus just getting in Zoom and having a party. I don't know. They have to have something to focus on. And then they actually have to turn in that material to prove that, yes, we did talk about these things and this is what we talked about. And also as well, another suggestion for that is having the students need to notify the instructor when they're having these, so that the instructor can just kind of pop in, whenever they want to make sure that they are following the protocol, and also too for any questions and answers that the students might have. Okay. All right, so on our next slide here, we're going to talk about kind of how you would put this up in Moodle. And I'm sure everybody is familiar with this. Sarah, I know you're our newest one to LSU. But what we're going to do really quick is we're going to take a look to see how you can put this up. And this is more of like the notification, notifying the students when things are done. It's going to be very important in these situations that you give, as Melissa said, there's clear, concise directions of when things are due and how they are due. So as Melissa is scrolling through this, our course is a 3-day-a-week course, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we have broken it down into that. So on Monday, August the 24th, that student knows either prior to or possibly during the class, there's going to be some type of a video that they're going to have to watch. They're going to need to make sure that they have reviewed those course materials and possibly read the book. The same thing for Wednesday. And what you can do underneath the dates there is give your directions. So for this, we're saying before attending the class, complete the follow assignments. And for each day, like I said, for that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we have different things that they need to do. In this course, they are also doing some discussions. So we've put in there when the student needs to have their original post. We've put in there when we think it is a good time for the student to have responded to at least one or two of their classmates, if that is something that you're wanting to do. And then finally, everything's always due by Sunday. So making sure that the student has completed these things by the designated day and time for on the weekend. So in this case, the student needs to make sure that they submit the module 1 assignment, make sure that they have definitely done that discussion. And for some of these courses, they have to do something by the census date. So, making sure that you have that and when you have to have those materials turned in for that as well.
Karina, is this
Yes.
is this structure built into Moodle? I mean, the day-by-day option of putting.
No, if Melissa can go back to the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, this is what is in there right now. So you have somewhat of a layout. So it'll say like, upon completion of this module, you'll be able to, and then you list your objectives.
So this
like
is a template that we can, sorry, this is a template that you can request. When you get your teaching shell just generated, it is not like this. It's very bare bones. It says, start typing. But you can actually request this, and in our follow-up email, we'll include information on how to request this template. And that way it provides this structure for you that you just have to edit.
Yeah, the red is directions, for you to say, okay, you might want to put this here, those type of things.
And one will be able to request this from, okay.
You can request it today.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then you were saying that you can request it, there's a prompt in Moodle somewhere?
Well, in the follow-up email, we will send instructions in our follow-up email on how to make that request.
Okay. That's good. Thank you.
And then, Stephen, a very good question. Thank you for asking that. One of the things, if you do have questions about this layout, or if you do have more questions about maybe some more assignments or the modality of how it needs to be done, please feel free to come to one of our live supports, and we'll be glad to help you out. If it is how to set up Zoom, or how to set up VoiceThread, or any other little add-ons to Moodle, those questions you can direct towards to the FTC, and we will have that information in our final email that we're going to send out to you. Okay?
I'll send a link to this information that has.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So I'm back to the slide, Karina.
Oh, good. Thank you. All right. Also, some considerations, and this is something that a lot of us, myself included, when I was teaching, I really didn't think much about this because I was predominantly in front of the class. And I knew the different things that I would have to do for my students if I knew that they had a disability. But let's say you don't know that somebody needs to have things a little more accessible. So we like to caution on the side of error. Make sure that you design everything so that it is accessible to those who do have to have some type of accessibility made for them. So one of the things that we recommend is the design and teaching accessible courses. And in the email link, the email that you're going to get after this, you will have a link to this course so you can kind of sign up and take a look at it and those type of things. And the other big thing that a lot of us honestly don't think about is copywriting. One of the things that we have done for years, I've always shown this video in the course, but now you want to put it online. Well, when you go and put something online, we have to worry about the copyright considerations. So if you do have any questions about anything that you normally would have done in the classroom, and now you're putting that online, let's say it's an article or a video, things along those lines. We have somebody here at LSU, and she is the copyright policy director. Her name is Darcy Olson. And please feel free to reach out to her, and she will be glad to help you with that. And she's also trying to work and getting a lot more accessible type materials for us. And let's say that you do have a video that you have shown forever and a day, and you can't find it in an accessible format, and you're wanting to put it up online. Contact Darcy. She'll be glad to help you out and see if that's something that is going to definitely be feasible. Okay.
So I have a general question.
Yeah, sure.
So if we just put a YouTube link on Moodle, does that involve copyright issues?
It is, I'll answer this one. If you are linking them to YouTube's platform and if it's embedding it, it's still, the students are still watching it on YouTube. It's still pulling that information from YouTube. That is not an issue. If you are recording it, if you're using like a screen recorder to record it from YouTube to put it on Moodle, that is taking their work and trying, to share it. And that way that's not giving credit back to YouTube. But as long as you're using the links back to YouTube, Moodle will automatically embed it and play it in Moodle, but it's actually playing from YouTube. So YouTube actually sees those views. They get everything that they want to see as far as that traffic. I would be mindful that you're using reputable YouTube channels so that they're not going to be pulled down, because if someone shares something that does have a copyright claim or stake, YouTube can go in and pull that down and it won't be available in your class anymore. So just kind of be mindful of the channels that you're selecting from, and are they the original creator of that material?
So
That
in
ain't.
general, attaching a link is safe.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Yes.
download and upload.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Great question. Any other questions about copyrights or accessibility? Okay, well then that brings me to our next slide, just questions in general. If you do have any questions or comments that you'd like for us to address, and we've addressed a lot so far, but if you do have any remaining, please just unmute yourself, hit that space bar, right, Stephen? And and we'll be glad to help you out. Or if you want, just put it in the chat. I have mentioned it a few times throughout my conversations that we will be sending out an email. And included in the email, you're going to get an infographic that does talk about the blend principles that we talked about earlier. Also a public link to the recording of this webinar you will get as well. It's a good resource to go back and to look at that. I think, Sarah, you had mentioned that to Stephen. One of the good things about recording a lecture is that it can be, or make sure that you have it accessible to the students again to go back and to take a look at things. Going back to the recording, when I was in college, that's the only way I made it through anatomy physiology was recording those courses and going back and taking a look at it and having the access to do that. Also too, we're gonna give you a link to the facility resource course and the information for FTC and also for ourselves for our live support that we do. So once again, I'm going to open it up to everybody. Does anybody have any questions or comments that you would like to make?
I had a question. The
Yes.
the sort of example mapping sheets that you had put up there, do you have those, like a file you can attach to the chat or something? I'd like to look at them again.
They're going to be in the faculty resource course in the link that we're going to share, and I'll make sure to highlight where it is and where the time and task calculator is in that course.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.
Thank you, both of you.